Hi, good evening. My name is Leann and I'm with the Clovis Unified Family Resource Center, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's presentation on twice exceptional children and how we can support them. So first, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the Family Resource Center. I apologize if you've heard this before, if you've been to our other webinars, but for those of you that this is your first time joining us, I'd like to tell you what the Family Resource Center does and how we offer support to families. So we're housed with the early intervention team with our school district, birth to 3, called City Kids. I help families navigate the IFSP process, understand their parent rights. We also help with that transition at age 3 to school-based services, if that is applicable. And then the Family Resource Center continues to serve families all throughout Clovis Unified who have children either in special education, have an IEP, or even families that have a concern or don't understand how to go through the assessment process, who to turn to for help. So again, we serve families birth to 22 throughout Clovis Unified. So one of the things we do are these parent workshops. We offer materials to families that help educate them about their parent rights, and we act as a liaison, helping families get connected to resources either within the district or out in the community. So again, here's my contact information, and please feel free to reach out. And lastly, this is the disclaimer that this presentation is for educational purposes only. The views don't necessarily represent the position of the Clovis Unified School District, and nothing in this presentation is legal or medical advice. That being said, I'm so grateful for tonight's presenters. This panelist has a wealth of information to share with us, and I'd like to turn it over to them at this point. Let's get started. Thank you.
That will be sharing their stories via video tonight. So this is the first one, Julie, and she is a mother that has recently gone through this process, and I did support her through the process. She lives in Southern California, so you may hear in some of the videos that I show of her tonight, she will be she may reference me, so that's why that may come up. But so Julie here is going to share. Sorry, I'm trying to move things around on my screen. This is always fun. All right, so I'll let Julie share.
Nobody explains to you the path and what does this look like. It's all very daunting, and there's a lot of checklists, I would say, but that's on their side. On our side, I'm not supplied any type of path. I mean, when they're young, you're a new parent and you have a young child. We're novices in all this. We don't know everything. And we need somebody to hold our hand. And if somebody can create tools for parents to better understand, that goes a long way. We can do better supporting families and letting them know what's going on and what their rights are.
So the video is not playing very well.
Yeah, it's just like what we talked about. It's very slow and
Slow.
broken.
Okay. Could you
Right.
guys get the gist of it?
Yeah, just that how hard it is. I remember that well myself. All the acronyms that everyone talks, and I share with families all the time, Nikki, how intimidating it was, to be a mom and feeling like, first off, I'll say I was the Frankie Heck mom. If anybody has ever watched The Middle, that show, Okay. I wasn't June Cleaver in my pearls, and I was the let's hit the brakes and see what rolls out from under the seat. Okay. For a snack. Like, I was overwhelmed. I had so much on my plate, and to go into a meeting and you're just trying to get help, from these professionals, and in your heart what your child needs, but to sit in front of a room full of, typically well-dressed and very educated people, and they're talking about your child and talking in acronyms, and it's hard. It can be hard. Not always. I mean, there are so many wonderful and caring professionals like you, but the process itself can be very difficult. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I share with people, like, we go through this all the time, and we still need our checklists,
Mm-hmm.
and we know what we're walking, and what we're doing. We know the process, that let's not hide this from parents. It's
Right.
nothing that we intentionally keep secret. It's just we do it day to day. So yeah.
Right.
And that was kind of my second bullet point here on the, we do this daily. The process can be new for families. I also want to acknowledge, for the professionals and the teachers in the audience, that, to remember that families may have gone through extensive, frustrating, and or in a very emotional road prior to getting to this point of assessment. So in this presentation, I don't talk about screening necessarily. I don't talk about how to get a referral or a request at any of that. I'm not to that, because that varies depending from district to district and age. There's a lot of variables that go into that. So I don't go into that process, but just a reminder for the professionals and a validation for parents that it's not just you, that it's very common that the families, by the time they get to this point, they may be a little frustrated. So to keep that in mind. So, and then also for the early educational, for, birth to 3 or even up anytime pre-kindergarten, this process, this assessment may be a family's first interaction with the school system, right? So we want to be welcoming. And again, the process can be overwhelming. And for professionals, I always want to remind to meet parents where they are. And for parents, I want to help you understand where you may be. So just remember that even considering that you have a child that may have some sort of special need or disability or something, it's like a loss of a dream kind of thing. You have this what you think, this expectation for your child, and it changes even if the assessments don't even come out that there's a disability or something, everything may come out fine. Just the fact that thought's coming into your head could put you in this whole different world. But so there is a grieving process, and I will, even if you have a 13-year-old, that it's a lifelong grieving process. My brother is 39. He just turned 39 a couple days ago, and I still grieve as a family member. I grieve for him. There's those milestones that come up, prom or living on his own, or now it's getting a job and so forth. So it's ongoing. This stage, I'll go into that a little bit more in the next slide, but and then there can be cultural differences, that we may not be aware of. So just a reminder to be open to those. And then also, if you are a family member that you're seeing like that there is clearly a cultural difference, feel free to come and explain that to the team. Like, you know, I don't understand, like this is my perception and this may be how we deal with this. Because we want to respect the differences, you know, and work together as a team.
Right. And Nikki, I'm so glad you brought that up because, you know, one of the things that I think is so important from a professional standpoint is taking into consideration what that family's perspective may be as well, right? So we, again, serving the whole school district, I work with, you know, lots of different families, and I can't tell you how many different types of reactions you can get. Some families are relieved that their child's finally being assessed, and we knew something was going wrong, right? But you know, they need extra help, but they weren't quite sure, so they're so relieved. Other families, just that stigma, like in their mind from their country, okay, that could be a very negative, you know, mindset. I have literally had a family weep, and I thought, you know, are you grieving? You know, you're trying to process it at the moment, and then come to find out they were so scared because in their country, which they had just recently come from, if you have special needs, you were sent away. I mean, and so that was literally what was going through their mind as we're talking to them. And so,
Oh, wow.
right? Oh my goodness, and we couldn't love on them enough. And oh no, you get to come, you know, come see the class, and it turned out to be wonderful. They were so relieved. Then it turned to tears of joy and gratitude. But I will never forget, they were so fearful, and it was just because that's what they were coming with. That was their knowledge. And so it's always really important to keep, you know, a family's perspective in mind. And like you said, for a family to feel comfortable enough to speak up and say, you know, I don't really understand this, or I want you to understand where I'm coming from. So thank you for bringing that up.
That's an excellent example. I had never even seen anything quite that extreme, you know.
It was. I will never forget that poor mom and dad. Yeah. And even, you know, just within different families, you know, we tend to think when we think cultural that it's like some different nationality or something, that even within different families, you know, you may have just different dynamics. Like my mom now, when we do stuff for my brother, she's like, nope, Nikki does it, you know. She's just so respecting those differences, you know. Maybe the dad's role is very detached and maybe not. So right. And also, and that's a great point too, because we're talking about the assessment process. How often, you know, may, you know, one parent be so invested in this and wanting this, and the other parent could be like, no, or vice versa. The parents are, you know, I don't want to say excited, but, you know, they're thankful to be trying to figure out help, but then maybe grandparents are like, nope, you just need to wait. They're fine. If you just did this, right?
Yeah.
If I had $1 for every time, you know, a parent told me, well, my mom said if I just did this, you know, they would learn to speak, or, you know, those behaviors would go down. So it's hard.
Exactly.
Parents get a lot of input from a lot of different sources.
Absolutely. And I'll share when we go into one of the other parents that agreed to be interviewed for this, like she was told to put her child in an institution, you know. So this was years ago, but yeah, I hope that doesn't happen anymore. but yeah. And then the final thing to highlight on just, you know, remembering to meet parents where they are, if you're a professional, and parents understanding where you're at, that there can be other family stressors going on. Like right now, my gosh, COVID, right? What family isn't experiencing other stressors now? But you know, there may be, you know, challenges within a marriage, or a recent divorce, or a death in the family, or moving, or, you know, who knows? There's a whole list of things that might be going on. So just to keep that in mind. Parents, not all families may feel comfortable disclosing that up front. So. All right, real quick, just to go over the link to where to find more information and where I stole this cool graphic from is at the bottom here. But so just looking at the 5 stages of grief. So teachers, you may, or, you know, professionals, you may see a parent in one of these stages. And, you know, I think most often, like maybe an anger stage, right? So don't take it personally, or try not to take it personally if you happen to be the brunt of that anger that day from a parent. Recognize, you know, like, oh, wait, they may be in the grieving process right now. So it starts with denial, then anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And we use depression here. This is a psychological website, but you know, it doesn't have to be full-blown depression like we think of depression. It can just be almost more of a sadness, you know, and then finally on to acceptance. And remember, this can go on throughout the lifespan of the student with a disability. So denial's a big one that you'll see in early education with families, and you may be a family that, you know, experience that or are experiencing it right now, you know, that it's as an early childhood educator, I used to see it all the time, you know, oh, he's fine. And then also, again, the anger and so forth is they're very, very common emotions. So if you are a family and you are a parent and you are experiencing these right now, just know that it's normal. This is a very well-researched, documented process that we go through. We go through it for many other things too, but. Okay, so what I did is I broke this process down to trying to make it a little more simple and understandable for those that just don't do it every day like us. Like, we got this, the process after doing it for so long, but breaking it down. So the first step that we'll look at is the actual referral. So a referral has been made. Again, remember, there may be, before this process starts, there may be like a screening process that happens before. There may or may not be, but we're kind of starting off at, you've been given we call it an assessment plan, a consent to have an assessment conducted on your child. So that's where we'll start off. And then the second part is actually when the assessment happens, that actual process of assessing. And then finally, you receiving the results of that assessment. These are, I just think in my mind as an early educator, these are 3 very distinct processes in this whole assessment process as a whole. So, and you'll see, so there are these names, one under the 1, 2, and 3, they align with the 3 handouts that are given. There is another, the first one, I think it says an assessment. It just kind of talks about what an assessment is. I'll go into it a little bit when we get into this, but that goes into much more detail. And then the one after is if a child qualifies for an IEP, then what is an IEP, basically. So so we will start with the first step, which is a referral, getting started, and consenting for assessment. Do we have any questions or anything, Leann, to address before I jump in?
No, I think we're doing great. The one thing is just a reminder that if anyone needs the Spanish translation, post in the chat so Rebecca knows that you're needing that, please. But no, other than that, there's no questions. You're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so so the way that I have these broken down is basically how to support the parents, and then for each step, you know, how to support, and then what we can, how you can advocate, or how you can support your child, or what you can do during this process. So we'll start out basically, what is it first? So as early childhood professionals, we would want to start out just explaining, well, first of all, share the tip sheets. The first one on the just explaining what an assessment is, and then there's this tip sheet that aligns directly with this process. So explain what an assessment is and what the process looks like. So give a brief overview. Don't go into too much detail about the entire process at the beginning. You're going to overwhelm a parent. So and parents, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. And you could just share, and for parents, an assessment is just something used to determine a child's developmental strengths and areas of need. It does also, it is required to make a child eligible for special education services. That's why you will also see, so if you are a parent of an older child, this process has to be done every 3 years. Now, there are, in certain instances, different processes that can happen if mutually agreed upon, and that is not the typical process. It does, but just so you know that there are alternatives that are out there. So don't be alarmed if your child's teacher is asking you to do something else. You know, it's very child specific, but this is just this typical process. So and when you're looking at young children, especially, it can look just like play activities. So all the way up to older, you know, it may look more like that kind of paper pencil, or, you know, a teacher sitting with the student in front of them and asking questions type of assessment. So, and there's typically observations that are included in the assessment process, and interviews with caregivers. And that's a pretty broad term of who might be interviewed, whoever is involved in the child's life, really significantly involved. So, and then we want to explain that a formal assessment for special education does require written permission. So this is when we get into the assessment plan. And so parents, the district can't, well, yeah, they can't conduct an assessment without your permission. Now, again, there are instances like if you decline, but the district still needs, you know, going way above and beyond. There are certain instances when it can be done. And again, I'm not talking about your typical just run-of-the-mill assessment done. This is a formal assessment for special education services. So And these are all, there is IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Educational Act. Everything I'm sharing is basically dictated through this act. It's a federal act. So you might provide, a brief overview of that. So the assessment plan is the document that the district or whoever it may be that will be conducting the assessment. Again, this is specific to education. That just for some, there's assessments that may be done through doctors' offices and so forth. Other outside health professionals run under a different set of rules and laws than the education system does. So the assessment plan will outline what areas will be assessed and who will conduct the assessment. And again, this is like probably a 2 to 3 page legal looking document, and it's not written necessarily in parent friendly language. It looks like very legal language. So that's why, if you're a professional, explaining this to parents, review it with them. And then parents, it's okay to ask questions. So,
Nikki, speaking of which, we have a question.
Okay.
When does the school share the assessment plan?
When before they want to assess. So, so the plan is basically for you to sign to give permission for the assessment. So it could be, depending, if this is your first time coming in for an initial referral, an initial assessment for special education, they may take a brief look at the child first or something, or have a conversation with you first, and then present an assessment plan if they're going to assess. Just because the child's been referred for an assessment doesn't necessarily mean they're always assessed. But so this would be one of the first steps of the, like, we're going to do an assessment, and this kind of gets the whole process rolling.
So, and I like how you put in the handouts that timeline, because I've seen that before. It's so clear cut, because I know, again, as a parent, it's so confusing. You hear, timeline, and there's 15 days, for this, and there's 60 days for this. I had a parent call me recently and said, is it legal that they want to take 2 months to do the assessment? I was like, well, yeah, 60 days they have. And so, but it's so helpful as a parent, or for professionals to share that with a parent, that visual timeline, so this is where we're at, this is the step we're in, and so, now at this point, then we have this many days, so I think as a parent, those visuals are helpful.
Yeah, I actually forgot that I shared the California timelines.
It's just a document folder, so.
yeah, I kept that. Even as a teacher, it was posted right at my desk, because there's a lot, and there's a lot to remember. So yeah. I hope that answered your question. It's really hard to say when. Because there's so many depends. I always like to make sure parents understand what they're signing, and because it can be such a challenging legal type document to review. That's the importance of reviewing it with them. So, and then you'll hear me say this a lot of times, because just from my experience, I have found that parents sometimes need to be given permission to ask questions. They think that if they ask a question, they're being disrespectful. So if you're a teacher, remember, you can give them permission to ask questions. Some parents don't need it, but some parents do. I've dealt with parents that I would never question a professional, you know, how like why would I question that? Well, because you don't know what you're signing and you don't know what you're consenting to. So that's why you would question it. So it's okay, parents, to ask questions along the way. Again, we may just do this so often that we forget that not everybody is so used to this process. So it's not always that the teacher, the professionals trying to be disrespectful or to overwhelm you or not really be addressing your needs. We may just sometimes forget what it's like. So that's one of my reasons for creating these documents and doing this. And then briefly explain what the next steps are. You know, once that assessment plan is signed, the day that it's signed and received back at the school, when we get it back at the school, we typically date stamp it or something, but that triggers that 60 school days to complete the assessment and provide results. So that's just the assessment process. So there could be, at the end of that 60 days, if an IEP is going to be developed, it could be pushed out another 30 days. But just this process, there's 60 school days. So when you say 2 months, it may be longer than 2 months. It could be up to maybe even 3 months if there's a school break in there. So there's the school breaks, oh gosh, I've been in another state now, 5 days in California, aren't counted into that 60 days. So if there was Christmas break that we just came back from, those days on break don't count into that 60 days. So, and then there are other things you could see in that timeline. There are other things that might change this 60 school days. Like if it's within 10 days of the end of the school year, then it doesn't happen till next school year and there's only 30 days. But anyways, just be aware that in general, it's 60 school days, but there's always exceptions. It's legalese, I call it. So then we want to encourage parents, and parents, we encourage you to listen. And, you know, it may not always be easy to hear somebody say or present information, you know, that you know, we have a concern about your child. You know, that's not easy to hear. We do acknowledge that, but we do encourage you to at least be open to listening. So and professionals, you know, acknowledge that with parents. And then we want you to understand, parents, there are procedural safeguards that if you've been in the special education system for a while, you probably have a million copies that they're basically your rights. And what it talks about this assessment process in there, it talks about all kinds of information. So I won't go into those in detail, but they're called procedural safeguards. A lot of times you'll hear them referred to as parent rights. So professionals, you can review those with the family, kind of give them a brief explanation of what they are, but you will get those with the assessment plan typically.
And I'm going to give family resource centers a plug right here too, because that in California, that's what family resource centers do is, you know, they're all across the state. Every SELPA is required to have access to one. And so in Clovis Unified, we have our own, and that's what they're there for, is to help families navigate through, understand their parent rights, kind of dissect all this parent to parent, and give that support. But also, we do have a question, and I hope that I'm not jumping ahead because you might be getting to this, but a parent asked, what should be the areas of assessment, and is this info also in the notes?
So the district should assess in the areas of suspected need, right? If you're looking at like an infant or a young child, unless it's like clearly just like a speech only, typically they'll assess all areas of need. So when we say that, we're looking at motor development, whether it be like gross motor movement kind of things, or small fine motor with like writing, or more kind of cognitive, thought processes, learning, academics, sensory. It really anything that would impact a child within their school day could be assessed.
And she asked, what about social?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. And that's one of the things too that Nikki, I like to equip parents to think about ahead of time is, one of not to get too sidetracked, but what you brought up about the difference between the medical model and the educational model, that alone can be confusing for parents. Absolutely. Right? Understanding that alone, can be difficult. And then you have the regional center model, so you've got all these systems you've got to learn, and don't even throw insurance in there. But one of the things that I really encourage families to do is to think about the process, like you would an important doctor's appointment, okay? And to think about, all those things that you might be asked that I know, for one, I wasn't prepared for initially, when they ask things like, well, how many, words do your child have? I don't know. I haven't counted their words. I'm a busy mom. They've had their baths today, and I fed them dinner. I don't know how many words they have. I just know I can't understand them.
Yeah.
But, but thinking about things like that, like social concerns, do they play well with their peers? Are all that sort of big picture of what your concerns are, but also, what their strengths are. Because I know that's another thing that used to catch me off guard when they'd say, can you tell us what your child's strengths are? Well, I don't know. They brushed their teeth today. Yay.
Yep.
And so just really going in with bullet points. You don't have to write a novel. Again, there are professionals that are going to help, but just so you feel equipped as a parent to participate, and just feel prepared. Because we get in there and we get so much information and we're asked so many questions that sometimes we forget what that important information, because we're the expert on our child. That's what we have to share, right? We know them better than anyone. And so, and the professionals appreciate that perspective. They want that information from us. And so we as parents, that's how we can participate, is by being prepared to share that information.
Yeah, good point. And it just brought to mind, from the teacher's perspective, we know parents that you're overwhelmed, and a lot of times, we may not push you for more information or dig deeper or something if more than a surface level, or what on the surface level you're sharing, because we know that you're overwhelmed and we don't want to overwhelm you more, right? So that goes into the sharing, that this is truly a partnership. We at the school may know your child best in the school setting and what they do within the school, and maybe, you know, academic concepts or structure, routine kind of things. But I mean, you as a parent know your child as the person, typically the best. So good, great conversations. Thanks for your input, Leann, and your questions. So, and then again, just for parents, you know, you ask questions. So we want you to understand what this step of the process looks like. So, all right. So next, are the videos helpful to still share, Leann, do you think? Or
well, let's try another one and see what we think. Okay.
Okay. If not, I do have just maybe the video, but not embedded within the PowerPoint that we can try. But
okay.
So this is the next one, talking about, you know, a parent that went through the referral process. So just a couple things. So first of all, this parent went through this. So as for the professionals in the room, that this parent went through this process 35, 37 years ago. And it's still something she remembers. You know, how many of us remember things that we went through 35 years ago? So it's still this vivid in her mind. So that tells you how important this process is and how much it can stand out and have impacts on families. So the other thing I want to say is the child that this parent is referring to had already been expelled from 2 to 3 preschools, because I think she mentions that in here. So.
Well, it started out when he was little, and actually my mother was the first one to recognize there was an issue. I was kind of in denial. So I got hold of a friend of mine who worked in early childhood and told her what was going on, and she actually helped made the referral when he was like 1.5 years old for behavior more than anything. His language was delayed at that point. He had a few words, but not many.
I think there's more, but I think it froze. So we'll just go. Okay. So yeah, hers was, we look at that grief process, right? She was very much in that first stage denial, you know, when her mother basically told her, you will, like first and middle name, told her you will go get help for your child. So good. All right. So I'll pause here for a moment before we get into the actual, like, what happens. You've signed the assessment plan, and now all these people are going to start talking to you and assessing and so forth. So before we get into that process, I'll stop here and see if there's any questions here.
So we just had one. So who should be in an IEP meeting?
So the people relevant to your child, I mean, by law, you know, if they're already receiving, like the teacher or, you know, a district representative, it really varies. It may, if the child's only receiving speech services, it may just be you and the speech pathologist, or you know, there could be 10 different people, you know. I'm the actual IEP meeting, I'm not really going into in detail until that's kind of the third step here in receiving the results. But typically receiving the results is going to be anybody or anybody that's qualified to interpret the results of the assessment for you. It's typically the person that conducted the assessment will present the assessment. But
right. So for instance, like you would have the because we're talking about initial assessments, right? In general.
Yeah.
So I think too, you know, like you said, it's going to depend on what the child was assessed for. So you could have typically the school psychologist, you know, the nurse, a gen ed teacher, a sped teacher, a speech, anyone, you know, an OT, PT, you know, who was involved based on the needs of that child.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if a child is being, I don't know, assessed for speech, then a physical therapist wouldn't necessarily be there.
Right.
So, so it's hard to say exactly who is there, who needs to be there. It's really the relevant players should be at the table, basically.
One of the things I like to encourage families to do, and again, this is just a mommy perspective, is I always got confused, you know, originally as to who even people were and their roles. Okay, so I would, if you have connected with one person, ask them, like, let's say you've been talking to the speech therapist, right? That's who you brought your concerns to, or that's who, you know, maybe it was the teacher who reached out to you and said, hey, you know, we need to do an assessment. Whatever it is, whoever that person you've been connected with, ask them, could you email me the list of names of who's involved and their title? And then, you know, and again, you know, I'm pro binder. You know, I always want families to feel I know I'm a binder nut. I really want families to feel equipped to participate. And I remember vividly, even if I didn't know what all those acronyms meant, you know, at least I had all the paperwork in one place and felt, you know, more equipped to participate. And so, but really, you know, just having that, there are lots of resources online where, you know, IEP binders and things like that, where you can write down who the team members are and their contact information. And I like to have that ahead of time, because then you go into the meeting and it helps you then put a face to those names. And again, that's just parent friendly. We, like you said, Nikki, you know, professionals do it every day, but for a parent to walk in and there be 5 to 10 people sitting around a table, you know, that it can be so intimidating. And again, no matter how kind they are, no matter how welcoming they are, it is just to try and process that and understand what role they play and absorb all the information you're given. At the same time, you're worried about your child. You know, it's just those simple little things. Again, that communication with your team. Reach out and ask. It is okay. There is nothing you can't ask, okay? It is totally appropriate.
And we're going to look at those little things also as we go on to like receiving the results, and, you know, how to ease some of that anxiety with parents walking into a huge room, you know, and parents, how, like, maybe you can ask if a teacher doesn't necessarily offer. So this, a lot of the stuff that I share is if it's not law, it's just stuff that I've kind of come up with, that I found from having the unique position of being both a family member and being an early educator, to have seen both sides, and I understand both sides of it. So some of these are just kind of tips that I've come across and that I've done myself. So just know that that not every teacher is going to have the same perspective, right? So it's, that's one of the reasons why I wrote this, how to advocate for yourself or your child, you know, and a lot of times we think of the advocate, you know, can be like this aggressive type of word, you know, it's not, it's you acknowledging where you're at and what you need. So.
Right. And Nikki, in the comments real quick, there are a couple great suggestions. Well, there was a question, can parents invite people to the IEP meeting? Yes, of course you can. And typically we always recommend too, if you're, you know, if you have a spouse, bring your spouse, bring a friend, bring somebody that can be that extra set of ears for you, you know, and just help you process it afterwards. Also, you know, you could consider inviting your regional center service coordinator too, if your child is a regional center client.
Yeah. I worked for a district one time that they were at every single meeting.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah. Tamara, I see your question in the Q&A, and the assessment survey I think you're talking about is like when the actual assessment's happening and there's paperwork being sent home to parents that are filling them out, even though you've already said that information to them. So let me know if I'm going to get to that, because that's the next step. But we will also go into like the IEP and the meeting and that kind of, not an IEP meeting, the assessment results meeting, because not all assessment results meeting become IEPs. So, but well, the quick answer is yes, it's critical and it's very important, even if you've shared it verbally, to share it on the document as well. So I hope that's what you were getting at with that question. If not, ask it again. So, all right. So the next step is actually you've signed the assessment plan, whatever it may be, you know, if your child's already been receiving special education services, this is probably something you're not really going to see, other than if something is sent home for you to fill out, or you get a phone call from different people involved with your child, that, you know, to do that interview portion of the assessment process. Or it could be, you know, you're bringing your 1-2-year-old in for this 45-minute play session. So it can look very different. But this is when the actual assessments start happening. So for professionals, you know, provide a timeline, just kind of what happens first, what happens next, you know, what does this look like, you know, because it can be different. Now, again, if it's all happening in the school session, you know, it may be like, all right, you're going to get a phone call from the psychologist. You're going to get a phone call from the occupational therapist. Here's their names, you know, and parents, if you've given an assessment plan and you have questions like, okay, what does this mean? What, you know, I consent to this, but tell me what will you be doing, you know? And then who's the contact for questions, especially if the child isn't already in school. If you do have questions, who's that contact person? And Leann, you kind of talked about that a little bit earlier also. So, because there may be 4 different people calling you and doing assessments. So, and you know, if you do have, say you take your child in for a play assessment that's being done, and there may be, while your child's being assessed, there may be somebody sitting there asking you questions, right? So you might, for that specific, those specific people that you're dealing with, it may be helpful, like just ask for a business card if they don't give it to you. Because I know me as a parent, they might ask me questions and then I'll go back and I'm like, well, that was totally not when my child started walking, you know, like, what was that? Why did I even say that? That, you know, it can be a stressful process. So if you have corrections or clarifications, or if you remembered something different, or something in addition, who can you reach out to? So, and then again, just briefly explain that 60-day school day timeline. A lot of this you'll see is redundant, but it's kind of like we give an overview, and then when we get into it, then we go a little bit more into nitty-gritty, just not to overwhelm parents or in the process. So again, just explain the process: interviews, observations, assessment, like where are they going to happen? You know, is it depending on who's doing the assessment and the age of the child? You know, is it in the home? Are they happening at school? Are they happening at an agency? So just the location. Again, this is more geared toward first time assessments. If your child's already been receiving, they're typically just going to happen in the school setting. So inform parents of the specialists involved and their role. So all you the preschool people that are on here, I know there was several of you. You may not know the answers to these, so this is where you can help sit down and ask questions, or maybe be that liaison with the special education teacher, whoever's conducting the assessment. So who's going to be involved? Are there multiple people, multiple agencies, or is there just one? Is it just going to be a speech language pathologist coming out and doing a speech assessment? So you are not the special education professional. You're not expected to know this specific information. And then what do they do? What does that professional do? So we could say, oh, a school psychologist. Like what does a school psychologist do? You know, so they, you know, they're the ones that are looking at the behavior, maybe the social more, or, you know, it just depends on who's involved. But the speech specialists are going to look for information regarding speech and communication. Speech and communications are two different things, but they all fall under the speech specialist. And then a teacher may look at the more global picture of the child, all kinds of, especially younger ones, looking at all different developmental areas. Or for older kids, it may be more specifically academics. And sometimes the teacher may be looking at speech and maybe looking at social as well. So it really just depends on the child and how in depth their needs may be in that area. So, and then explain next steps. So after this 60 days, you know, there will be a meeting scheduled to review the results with you. And then you can explain to them, you know, well, to parents and parents, again, when I sound like I'm addressing early childhood, the professionals, these are all questions you can ask as well. That's on the next slide as well, but I don't want you to think these don't apply to you. Like, these are all very valid questions for you to ask going through this process. So, and then you might explain, you know, okay, so you're going to get one report, or you're going to get multiple reports of the results. So sometimes, a lot of times, especially in early childhood, you get what we call a multidisciplinary report, where everybody, the speech therapist, the teacher, the psychologist, the nurse, you know, everybody kind of comes and puts all their information into one very thick report for you. Or they may each have individual reports. As your child gets older, if you have an older child receiving special education assessments, it's much more common to have one report from the teacher, one report from the school psychologist. So there's not necessarily a right or a wrong. if there's only one person, if they're only being assessed for speech, then there would just be the single report from the speech. So. All right, and again, parents, we encourage you to communicate. So share current, accurate information, and then notify if you're scheduled for an assessment and your child is, well, I usually use if your child is sick, kind of now that's a whole different term now, but that's a question you could ask, like, hey, what if we wake up that morning and my child's sick? Do you still want to assess, or do we need to reschedule? But illness, anything, if you show up, note, and your child did not nap that day when they would typically nap, anything that may impact their performance is important for the assessors to know. Here is, I should just put an organized, just put Leann's binder. So I hope you have lots of copies. So hopefully people will be requesting them from you after tonight. So
I do, thank you.
Yep, gather information and any other outside reports that might be relevant. So this is something you could do, you know, this process seems like it takes forever from your perspective sometimes. So, you know, gather if you've been assessed through other places, if you have, you know, maybe it's not uncommon for the health field to have already done some assessments or tests with your child. So that is, if you feel comfortable sharing that information, those are very relevant for the people conducting this assessment. So I always tell parents, if in doubt, just to ask. Like, I have this, would this be helpful? Because as a teacher, I've had parents come in and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a gold mine for me. Thank you. This helps me so much. So, and then again, ask question. You're going to see this all the time. Ask question. We want you to understand what is happening, or what will be happening with your child. So, and just because, and another family I'm supporting, who's here, just went through this, right? And texted me like, they won't let me go in the room with the child. Is that normal? Yes, that is normal. So, but we forget sometimes as professionals that can be very alarming for a parent. So that is something you can do to advocate for yourself. You know, what we'll be doing, what is this going to look like when we show up for this assessment? Will they be in a room separate? Will I be in there with you? What does this look like? So, and I say, especially with these early childhood assessments, they may just look like they're sitting and playing with your child. I assure you they are not, but they are. We have all these assessments memorized in our head typically, and we're just going through it question by question in our head, but it looks like we're sitting and playing. A speech, if they're getting like a speech one, assessment, you may see weird things and you're like, what the heck? Because like the child's clearly pointing at something and going, you know, like, I want that toy. And we call it like playing dumb kind of thing. The speech therapist be like, I don't know what you want, you know, and it's just ways, different strategies that we use to encourage that child to communicate. We want to give them every opportunity to be successful in requesting that. So there may be weird things happening from your perspective, but I promise you they will have a purpose. And then again, just being patient, you know, parents, this may feel like a very long process, especially if you have, you know, a child that's having pretty significant needs. This can be stressful. Teachers, You may be able to offer help with urgent needs. You know, there's web resources, there's Leann. There's other ways that you may be able to help in the meantime of this 60-day timeline. All right, and the last video, Leann, that was a thumbs up on the last one. It was okay. All right. So this is, I believe both parents are on this one, and this is their perspective of the actual assessment process happening with their child.
So I went in with her for the assessment. It was about, an hour, and we went through a series of questions with her, and she answered them, and I sat there like a proud mom and watched her succeed at some of the things and fall back on some others. So that's how I got to the assessment portion of this. It was not seamless.
That was the screening.
Yeah, I mean, there was like this flip chart or this flip pictograph, I guess. And the person that was doing the assessment reviewed it with Olivia and would make notes.
I think it was kind of frustrating because he didn't really understand what they wanted him to do. So to him, it was just, okay, they want me to go play and I don't really understand what they want, but okay, I'm willing to do it. And he was okay. For me, the very first initial assessment was, because I was still in denial somewhat, was devastating, to be perfectly honest. It was like, this is our boy that we hadn't expected on having, and our girls were 13 and 10 when he was born. And so to learn that he was going to have all of these issues and all of the hopes and dreams that we had for his future were not going to come to pass probably. And at the time, I didn't have any idea that how long-term the care was going to be, but I just knew that it wasn't going to be what I had expectations for, or what I was assuming was going to be his life. It was like a death of the life that I had dreamed for him and the possibilities for him. It was very limiting, in my opinion, at that time.
Yeah, so this is significant in the life of a family. This process, I guess, is what that's clearly what I heard from her. So just keep that at the forefront. It may be something we do every day, but this is significant in the lives of families, which is why I'm so passionate about getting this information out. So any questions here before we move on to actually receiving the results of the assessment?
Well, I wanted to make a comment, one that was so impactful, her comments, like you said, that even all those years later, how this was still so ingrained in her mind of how she felt. But, too, I think for professionals, I think it's so different too, even why the child's being assessed. I've seen parents be very upset, even over a speech assessment, like really, truly concerned and heartbroken that their child is struggling communicating. And then, all the way to obviously our, severely disabled children. A child could have medical needs involved that is so encompassing. And in fact, I will show parents and professionals that I talk to a chart that can show like the child or the family at the center, and then around it are all the different providers that can be involved in that one child's life. And as much as, we as parents respect all the professionals involved and we need that information, it ultimately, at the end of the day, parents are left with having to decipher all of that and really kind of decide like who they're listening to. And right, because you can get multiple opinions about the same child, a whole host of opinions of what is going on, right? And just that compassion and caring can mean so much to a family who is trying to navigate that. I'm telling you, parents can tell a mile away when someone, just if they care, you know, when you see a team that comes in and, you know, they're just going through the motions, and I get it, you know, everyone's busy, everyone's tired, everyone, you know, they've got their own children at home too, right? I mean, that professional could be navigating stuff that parent knows nothing about. You know, maybe their mom just got diagnosed with cancer, you know, or maybe their child's sick. And so I just always try and encourage everybody to have grace with one another, because we just don't know what someone else is going through. And so just to, you know, have that compassion, and if you don't understand, go ahead and ask, but just don't assume the worst right off the get-go. And sometimes that's what I can get, you know, when I see, you mentioned advocacy and, you know, advocacy groups and, you know, really wanting to, you know, hold districts accountable or hold, you know, every I dotted and T crossed. And I just think, oh, wait a second. These are, you know, kids involved and families, and, you know, let's try and work together first, okay? And there are procedures to go through if you can't come to an agreement, by all means. But man, don't go in guns a-blazing and just assume that everybody's out to get you, okay?
Absolutely. So, yeah, that's a very good point. You know, we're all, you know, educators don't come into this field because it's easy, you know. It's
right.
And there's a lot of emotions involved in it. Personally, I mean, the kiddos that I worked with, you know, they're my kids. I love them, and so many families I keep in touch with still, you know, and I'm like, oh, like, how's my boy? How's our boy? You know,
yes.
Those are my kids. It's personal for me as well, you know.
I can attest to Nikki's investment in those families. Yes.
Yeah. So that's an excellent point. So, and you know, you'll on that kind of same lines, you know, you might hear from other people where my child has this, and this. You need this, and this. You know, every child is different.
Right.
You know, that don't assume if, you know, something hasn't been recommended for your child, that like it's the school withholding something, you know. It's it could be that they just haven't seen that as a need in the school setting. So that's kind of the key thing, because our perspective is everything that we do is to help the child access their education. So if it may be a need at home or somewhere else, but if it isn't, and I'm talking once they start school age, it's totally different if they're like preschool, or especially if they're under the age of 3, then it's all home-based,
family-based.
So family-based, yeah. But yes, so our goal once they reach the kindergarten and up is really making sure they can access their education. So
do you want to go back to Tamara's question real quick, since we just talked about the assessment?
So there are you know, a lot of like parent information questionnaires that we'll get. A lot of assessments that we conduct in the schools have a parent component to them. So you'll get different questions to answer. Some of them, just be aware, may be way above your child's skill ability. That's okay. You may like, why are you even asking me this? It's just part of the standard assessment. You know, we can't go through and pick and choose which questions. We have to, by conducting this formal assessment. We have to follow by kind of the rules of the assessment. But so those are very important. And even if you've already verbally said that information, even if you said it in an interview, even if you said it to the psychologist, but now you're getting a speech asking it, or, you know, of coming in a form, you may have said it 3 times to 3 different people, and then it's on this document and they're asking you through this form, still say it again. You know, it's not that that we don't talk to each other. It's just that we kind of look at things through different lenses. So if I'm asking you about your child's communicating, you know, I may be looking at a little bit more of a, like, just to get an understanding of how you communicate with your child, where if it's a speech therapist asking, they may be really trying to analyze that a lot more than I am as a teacher, right? So that's just an example, but yes, so fill out those survey forms. Sometimes you may be overwhelmed with them. It's more work for you, you might feel like, but I assure you that every one you get, the educators probably have 2 or 3. So don't feel bad, you're not in it alone. But
so Nikki, so I think too, the way I interpreted what that question is, does the assessment, do what the parents answer, does that impact the results?
yes.
Like, is that taken into consideration?
Yeah, especially with those parent kind of rating scales where you're saying sometimes, maybe, not a lot, those types of questions sometimes are literally just input into a computer. And then results are generated from that. So those are critical. And if you're not sure on a question, I know even sometimes, like, the school psychologist would have me as a teacher fill one out for maybe a behaviors within the classroom, but then they also have parents fill one out for behaviors at home, where there were questions like, oh, I don't really know how to answer this. You know, I'll answer it, and I might just write a note right by it to kind of clarify if you're not sure. So that's okay to do also. So, but they are, those are critical when we start bringing everything. So what eventually happens is we kind of all get together and bring it all the pieces together to kind of come up with a plan or a decision on eligibility. So
I think it's important for families to remember too, that's why you want to share. If you've got outside agency or medical professional reports, you know, share that as well. It doesn't mean that the district, like, for instance, I'm going to give just a broad example. Let's say a psychologist, you know, diagnosed your child with ADHD, okay? That doesn't mean that the school district automatically, oh, they qualify, you know, for an IEP and they have ADHD and that is their, you know, they're going to qualify under OHI because of it. You know, that's it. But that information, it's all about collaboration, right? And they've seen your child in this setting. Share that information. That's important information for them to have. You know, and two, I think now if they're in school, they'll probably ask the teacher to fill out a survey. Isn't that right, Nikki? Because they want that teacher's perspective of what's going on in the classroom. And again, because those assessors, they want, they need that perspective, right, of how that child is performing in different settings. And so
I will say also, in filling those out, whether you're, you know, a gen ed teacher or a special ed teacher or a parent, so forth, just try to be, you know, you could sometimes go to either extreme where, like, maybe you have this deficit kind of negative mindset going into it, or maybe you're that parent that's still a little bit more in the denial stage, or you're like me, where everything's fine and great and everybody's, it's just more the positive thing on there. It's important to kind of look at it as a neutral, like, just, does my child do this? You know, does, you know, I hope I'm making myself clear on that. Like, you don't want to go in there and paint this beautiful picture that everything's fine, because it may not be, but you don't also want to go in there and say everything's horrible. So yeah, really just honestly answer the questions that are on there. So they're very helpful for us. Was that all the questions for that? We cover most of it?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so next, all this has happened and you're like at the end of your rope because you feel like it's taken forever, right? So, and you could be the parent, or you could also be our preschool teachers that are here wanting to get help within your classroom for these kiddos too, right? So you kind of can have the same feeling. So now you'll get, this is where there's gonna be a meeting held to review the results. So in this day and age, it may be virtually over Zoom, it may be in person, it may be a phone call. I feel like the first ones aren't necessarily always a phone call, but you know, there's different ways. So you will, I'm just trying to see, I don't think typically you get sent home a letter that says like the time and the place and so forth. And you can sign, yes, I'm attending, no, I'm not attending. You can write on there. There's typically a question asking if you're bringing other people. So you can bring other people. Sometimes it may just purely be logistics. If you're going to bring 4 people with you, if grandparents and, you know, regional center and, you know, mom and dad are both coming, then that's important to know, because the person, you know, setting up the meeting, I need to know if I have 5 chairs available or I have 10 chairs available. So, or the space of the room even. So it's not always like we're prying. Like sometimes it could be just as basic as logistics. So so I always encourage families right on there who you know, if you're bringing other people. So so we want to explain, you know, where will the meeting be? That's always important. Who will be attending? So this kind of, we've talked about this a little bit, who will be there in the room, and then where will it be? You know, a lot of times, I'm trying to think, okay, I have a whole next slide on actually the meeting and kind of that, but and then consider giving the parents agenda. I think you have kind of in your binder, Leann, just kind of like a general what happens at an IEP meeting. Sometimes you may get an agenda. You typically won't, as a parent, get an agenda, but that doesn't mean you can't ask. Like, can you tell me what this meeting's going to look like? What's going to happen? And they could say, well, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then this will happen, you know. But as teachers, it can be just a very simple agenda like that too. You know, I go into meetings and I like to have agendas. So, and then you can explain, you know, what their role is at the meeting. Parents, you can ask, what is my role at this meeting? So give parents permission to ask questions. You know, that goes back to what I said before. And then when should they ask? You know, sometimes people want to review their entire report before they answer questions. Sometimes, just like at this webinar, you know, Leann and I get on early, like, okay, when do you want questions asked? You know, that's just a normal thing. And then I would, especially at an initial one, encourage parents to bring a support person with them. You know, it's like when I go to the doctor and it's not just my standard health checkup, you know, run of the mill thing, everything's fine, I'm just doing it because it's due for this. If there's a concern, I always bring someone to be my ears, because I'm not going to hear what they're saying. I may be hearing, but I'm not going to hear and process what they're saying. So, and it is an important meeting, you know. And then, and explaining the reports. So again, going back, explain the reports the results will be given in the form of a report. Again, the single or multiple, there'll be different sections to the report. Typically, there's identifying information, there's some history and background, observations, interviews, different assessments, recommendations. Some will have eligibility on it as well. Not all will, depends on who within the district is the person responsible for determining the final eligibility. And then, so there are, during the meeting, you know, parents, you can correct information such as typos, inaccurate information in history interview sections, not so much in the actual assessment where, you know, I sat down as a teacher and did this, but in those history typos, you know, maybe you said that your child started walking at 9 months, and then when you went back and looked at the baby book, it was 12 months, or you gave a different, like, this is the year that they went in for an assessment with a speech pathologist, but then when you actually went back and looked at the document, it was a different day. Those kinds of things are okay. Or if, you know, during the interview, something was misinterpreted with what you said, those types of things are okay to correct. So it's not uncommon to get a revise. Well, I can't say it's not common, but there are certain times when you may get a revised report. But, and then explain what the next steps. There may be additional assessments that happen after this. There may be referrals to other agencies. There may be an IEP meeting scheduled. A lot of times when you receive the results, if the child is eligible, that meeting also becomes the IEP meeting. Sometimes they're two different meetings. So just clarifying that. And you may get additional assessments, you may get referrals, you may get all of it too. So it really depends on what the results were. All right, looking at the meeting specifically, this is where we get into the human aspect of it, right? And a lot of these you kind of touched on, Leanne, earlier. So just looking at the arrival. So walking into a room with a bunch of people can be very intimidating, right? So you can't, unless, you know, if it's a parent that feels comfortable, you know, you or parent, you know, here's where you can advocate for yourself. Be like, I really hate walking into that room with a bunch of people. Can you like meet me out at the front office, or meet me outside? Can, you know, we just kind of debrief a little bit before we go into it. That's okay to ask. So it may not always be possible. I would say most of the time, I'm sure it is, at least just to like meet you outside and walk you in. Because sometimes I would say I would have like 3 IEP meetings back to back, especially at the end of the school year. So, but if possible, you know, walk up, meet them, and walk into the room together. You can pre-arrange, like I'll meet you at the front office, and then I'll walk you to the room. that time of walking to the room, parents, is a great time to ask questions. Teachers, it's a great time to explain how many people are in the room. Like, you're gonna walk in there, you're gonna see like 7 people there. It's gonna look intimidating, you know. So we're all here to support your child. So just help put the parents at ease. Seating is always very important. You know, having a family member sit next to a trusted person. Parents ask, like, can I sit next to this person if the empty chair at the table is not next to someone that you trust? And I always say this because, you know, we understand that this process can be intimidating a bunch of people. So it was not, if I was sitting next to a parent that I had a really good relationship with, you know, they would lean over and ask me a question, and depending on the question, you know, I may be able to just answer it real fast, or I'm like, oh, that's a great question, let's bring it to the team. You know, so sometimes just that simple act of sitting next to somebody that you trust. Totally not relevant if you're in a Zoom meeting like we tend to be now, but so. And then watching use of jargon and acronyms, as far as like additional assessments, referrals, IEP meetings, you know. There are, I mean, you can go, I think Leann's binder again, do you have a list of different acronyms and what they mean?
Yes, I do. And again, I mean, as a parent, it is mind-boggling, all the acronyms that professionals use. So, yeah, don't be afraid to ask.
Right. And yeah, just stop. And a lot of times when I became administrator, I almost saw that as my role. Like, wait, you just said parent, do you understand what this, they just said that, do you know what that is? And sometimes they're like, yeah, I do. Okay. But because even the best well-intentioned teacher or other school, you know, professional will slip and throw out an acronym just because it's part of our everyday language and talking to each other. So yeah.
I love being housed with our early intervention team, City Kids, because I feel like those families above anyone, you know, you're just getting used to all those acronyms of having an IFSP and what that all means. And then we're like, just kidding, it all changes now at age 3. Yeah. And so you're going to learn something completely new now.
Yeah. That's so kind of, and I'll step back. So what Leann is referring to as my stop and confirm understanding, I'm going to just model it for you here. Mm-hmm. So there's 2 different special education, I don't want to say services, components, I guess. So before a child is 3, so from birth to 2.5 years old, they fall under kind of a different set of laws and rules. It doesn't affect assessment at all, but they don't get an IEP. They get an individualized family support program, right? Where an IEP isn't educational. So that changes once they turn 3. So that's what she was referring to. You know, the families might learn this whole IFSP, early intervention, it's sometimes called, you know, there's different names for it. That is the forms, and the focus is all on the family, and the forms all look very different. Then the child turns 3 and it's a completely different process and form. So yeah. But so that's like during the meeting, stop and confirming understanding, that's okay. As the teacher or the professional in the room, you know, like we can say like, wait, did you understand that? Or parent, you can, you know, like just kind of raise like, I'm not really sure what you meant by that. Or so I always tell teachers, or my practice was, if something was really important at the meeting, because you may not, as a parent, you may not know if what that person said was important or not important. I saw Rebecca doing this. I wasn't sure if she was asking.
Oh, I think she's translating.
Just okay.
You know, Nikki, too, something that I have seen used a lot with teams, especially like you said, that early intervention, that transition to the school district, those meetings, that initial IEP, that I, as a mom, I was like, where was that when my kids were young? Is I love having name tags, whether it's just, it could be a piece of cardstock folded in two with the name and the title in front of everybody, you know, but for a visual, for a family to walk in, especially if you are talking about, you know, a kiddo maybe with some medical needs and you've got more professionals involved, but even just with that basic, you know, 4 or 5 professionals in there, to have that visual of, you know, oh, that's Nikki. That's the, you know, special education teacher. That's the program specialist. It is mind-boggling how important that is to a mom or dad, you know, to walk in and see that, like, okay, I remember that. And then, like you said, you know, it just makes you feel connected, you know, to know who they were and to know, okay, that's my team. That's who I reach out to.
Yep. Great point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's okay to take a break. You know, I tell professors, like, read the parents' body language. If they're exhausted, they're overwhelmed, it can be emotional, you know, or if you see maybe that they're getting agitated or upset with something, you know, you can, like, all right, can we just take a break? Let's go for a quick walk and let's kind of debrief and see where we're at, you know. Or, you know, offering a break. Consider reconvening for a second meeting if it's needed. Sometimes the meetings there's just so much information to cover that it is necessary for 2 meetings. You know, from the professional side, you know, especially when you have a lot, you know, there is, you know, maybe you've blocked out this much time in your day, or you have another meeting afterwards. So sometimes if it's going long, it is going to need a second meeting. So that is possible. Parents, you're not held hostage in the room if it really is too much or overwhelming or so forth. It is okay to take a break, or I would, you know, recommend taking a break first, and then if you can continue, then continue. But all right, a lot of this we kind of already talked about. We're running short on time, but so again, share your family goals, ask for clarification, ask questions. So professional, these are things you can encourage parents to do. Parents, these are things that you can do. Assist parents in reviewing documents presented during the meeting. And then understanding each team member's roles and what their responsibility is with their child. You know, you can, you want to understand. Teachers encourage parents to understand that you may not know that the school psychologist is the one that, you know, is focusing on behavior with your child, or is focusing on with social emotional items. So and then parents, ask questions, clarify next step, understand expectations of what will be coming after this. So sometimes it's an IEP, sometimes it is a referral to another agency. You know, if they don't qualify for special education services, there are other things that they may qualify for, or resources to help support. So ask questions, clarify what next steps maybe they do. Maybe you had received the results, they were eligible at the same meeting, you got an IEP done. Like, what does that look like? What's going to happen after all this? Like, I just signed all this paperwork and I just agreed to all of this. What is the next step? And that's why I say understand expectations here, because you may think like all these people are going to show up your house the next day, you know, we know, and we're like, no, like we're going to schedule a school bus to come or something, you know. It's so there's lots of different things. So just make sure that your expectations are accurate as to what actually is going to happen. So that's that team, and that really encouraging that.
You know, Nikki, something too that I think for myself, it was probably a couple years, honestly, before I knew that as a parent, I could request an IEP meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I thought that, you know, you get that once a year, this is it, boy, gear up, because, you know, you're going to have that one time to ask questions, right?
Yeah.
And I really didn't know that as a parent, I had the right. No, we don't always need to request a whole meeting. Again, I always want families to feel comfortable with reaching out to your team. If you have a concern, you know, gosh, you know, I really notice that, you know, Betty Sue is really struggling with this. Reach out to your team and ask. You can send an email, but if it is something, you know, more significant and you really do need all the team players involved, you have the right as a parent to request that. Also, I think it's important for families to remember, and I think this goes along with that initial IEP meeting and this process, is that it's a living, breathing document. Okay. And I think Nikki, I've sat in many IEP meetings with her, and I think she did a beautiful job of explaining this to families, is that, you know, if 5 weeks down the road, you know, we figure out this isn't working, or we need to increase this or decrease this, you know, or come up with some new goals. That's what an IEP is. It is a living, breathing document. And so, again, you know, it's important that families remember this is an important legal document. It's going to drive the services your child receives, but it's also, you know, editable, right?
Yeah, it's not written in stone. It's not written in stone for a year.
Yes, it is meant to grow with your child. Yes.
Yeah. Just like a teacher can request an IEP at any time,
Mm-hmm.
Parents, you can request it. And another thing, you know, at the IEP meetings, I've always, you know, parents, even if you're asked to sign the document right
Mm-hmm.
on the spot, you don't have to.
Right.
It's a lot of information. I used to encourage parents, especially the first time, take this in for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to understand, sometimes maybe if it's just the mom at the meeting, go home and review it with dad, or, you know, whoever else should be supporting you. So don't feel that you have to sign it on the spot. Now, that doesn't also mean that you just like hold on to it for 2 months or something, you know,
Right.
just a few days, because we can't start anything that's been agreed upon in that document. We can't start until we have your consent. The IEP document is essentially just a legal agreement between the district and you as the family. So know that if it could delay if you delay the signing. So I'm going to skip. I had 2 more videos, but I'm going to skip those just for the sake of time. I'm going to hit final thoughts, and then so if you have any final questions coming about, throw them in there. And then just my final thoughts. This is, you know, we want to really be building that relationship and trust with families, and families you with the school. And it truly is a partnership and a team effort in educating your child. We want to make sure that families feel heard, right? We want to meet families where they are, and, you know, again, families communicate. It's please communicate with a trusted professional that you're dealing with through this process. Tools, you know, as teachers, if you have any tools, that's like Leann's binder. I'm going to go back again. We're going to really push that. It's free, so no one makes any profit off of it.
We're
really good tool to help understand our systems and our processes, and you know, it's very, very unique to the education system. You know, that our system, parents may be more familiar with the healthcare system and been going through stuff with that, but ours can look very different. And sometimes just that misunderstanding can break the trust and damage that relationship, so that will just make it can make it more difficult to get through this, your child's education, and support your child effectively. So, and just, we're traveling alongside families during this process. We are a team here doing this all together. So
yeah, we do have a question. Is there a timeline to returning the IEP?
I believe I believe there is. And again, it's been a couple of years I've been out of California, and it's different, and some states don't have a timeline. For some reason, 7 or 10 days is popping out at me. I don't know, is Shireen still on here? She might be able to throw it in the chat if she remembers, if she knows that. Not to call you out, Shireen, if you're still on here, but she's not. Okay. No, okay. There are, because then I typically, I usually say, if a parent isn't, I usually try, like, if the meeting's on Monday or Tuesday, like, do you think we can have that by Friday or Monday? You know, sometimes, you know, maybe, like in the case, my dad drove truck, he was gone all week. So if my mom wanted to go over anything with him, it was on the weekend. So that might maybe something you can ask, like, when do you need this back by? Yeah, I don't, I'm trying to think of what there's actually is language in the law, and it's probably in that procedural safeguard document, that's something like a reasonable amount of time is all. I don't believe that it has like a very specific legal timeline for getting it back. Because, so what happens, I'll say to the parents, you know, if we are responsible, now that we know if your child is eligible, and we know that your child is eligible for special education services, like we now have to begin implementing them. So we legally can't let you sit on that for 30 days. We have to be actively trying to get that back from you. So that I
find.
Yeah, I think the law actually, it says something to the extent of like a reasonable amount of time. But yeah, typically I wouldn't say any more than 7 to 10 days. So.
And just a reminder, excuse me, everyone, tomorrow I will send out a follow-up email. It will include, again, the link to the survey. It should show up when we log off. There should be an automatic link to the survey. Please take a moment to fill that out. Honestly and truly, it is important feedback to me. I need to know that, you know, if these webinars are meeting your need and what input you'd like to share. So, and also as a, you know, enticing gift, I do a raffle. So, you know, from the names that submit surveys, I'll draw a couple names and send you a little prize. So if that doesn't motivate you, that vague little teaser there, you know, to fill out a survey, but please, it really is important. And I appreciate, Nikki, so much, your time and your expertise. Yes, the recording link, I'm trying to look through the questions right now.
Yeah.
I'm not a good multitasker. Yes, the recording link will be shared. What it is it will be posted on the FRC YouTube channel by the end of the week. It takes me a couple days to get it edited and posted, but I will send you all those links. Everything, all the resources from tonight will be included in that email tomorrow, as well as your certificate of attendance. So again, if you have any questions, reach out. That's what we're here for.
I'm looking through the chat and there's several about getting your binder. So you guys should have Leanne's email. Just shoot her an email, I guess. And
yeah, well, tomorrow I will include that link to do that. Okay. And so also, let's see, I thought there was one more. Are we missing anything else? Oh, thank you. Yeah, perfect. If parents aren't in agreement, there'll be a continuation. That is correct. I thought, I guess that's all the questions. Sorry. All right. Well, we are at just about 8 o'clock. So if there's nothing else, oh, there was one. Here we go. Nancy or Nikki, you answered that live, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca, so much for translating. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And again, please reach out if you have questions. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.